On August 14, 2018, the Pennsylvania grand jury released a 900-page report on sex abuse in the Catholic Church within 6 of the state's 8 dioceses.
A diocese priest, Thomas Skotek, raped a young girl, got her pregnant, and then that priest arranged for an abortion. Bishop James Timlin expressed his feelings in a letter. He wrote, "This is a very difficult time in your life, and I realize how upset you are. I too share your grief." Except the bishop's letter was not for the girl. The bishop wrote that letter to the rapist. To make it easier to target their victims, the priest gave their favored boys gifts, gold crosses to wear as necklaces. The crosses were markings of which boys had been groomed for abuse.
The report also describes a priest who quit after being the subject of many child abuse complaints, but he asked for and received, according to this report, a letter of recommendation for work at Disneyland.
Listening to testimonies of abuse survivors and sifting through 500,000 pages of the Catholic Church's internal records, the grand jury found evidence that over 300 priests had sexually abused more than 1,000 victims, and the church had systematically attempted to cover it up.
The grand jury reports the truth is bishops and other Catholic Church leaders covered up the crimes and obstructed justice in order to avoid scandal, and that the same leaders persuaded victims not to report the abuse and police officers not to investigate the abuse.
Case after case, the report says, church leaders maintained a circle of silence.
And for a time, some of the dioceses sought to prevent the entire report from ever seeing the light of day. In effect, they wanted to cover up the cover-up. They sought to do the same thing that senior church leaders in the diocese we investigated have done for decades: bury the sexual abuse by priests upon children and cover it up forever.
Because of the scale of the cover-up and because most victims never come forward, the numbers are likely in the thousands. To give you an idea of just how widespread this abuse is, this all occurred in just 6 dioceses. There are 3,160 ecclesiastical jurisdictions worldwide. We're literally just scratching the surface of this child rape iceberg.
Pennsylvania is not a unique case. Yeah. It's all over the U.S., all over the world. I'm here in Chile, where the Cardinal Archbishop of the capital city of Santiago tomorrow is going to testify in front of the jury as a target witness of cover-up. Mm-hmm. So it's all over the world. Yes. It's horrific.
Everywhere that the church has been investigated, from Boston to Ireland, Australia, California, Chile, there has been widespread child abuse and systematic cover-up.
The abuse in Boston extended over 6 decades, involving over 230 priests and more than 750 victims.
It now appears that the church in Kerala is having its own spotlight moment of the sexual abuse of women and also of minors by priests.
Over the past 35 years, 4,444 victims have come forward to allege some form of child sexual abuse. Those victims identified 1,880 male and female perpetrators, including priests, religious sisters, and religious brothers, plus another 500 people unidentified.
Nearly 80 Catholic clergy across Chile have been accused of sexually abusing minors over the last several decades.
He handles up to 60 cases at a time and says it's the tip of the iceberg because bishops can investigate cases in their own diocese without bringing them to his tribunal.
There are 82 jurisdictions in the Philippines, 82. And supposing they'll send the cases all here, I might drown.
The goal has not been to protect children, but to avoid scandal.
In early 2013, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles released thousands of pages, revealing that in the 1980s, Cardinal Mahoney and a top aide tried to shield admitted sex abusers from law enforcement.
When priests came close to being caught, they were shuffled between dioceses.
We acted very appropriately with many times removal from ministry totally and completely.
Did you ever move priests quietly to another
That wasn't our process.
But according to the grand jury, in 1991, Worrell reassigned an accused priest, Ernest Payon, to the Reno diocese. In 1995, he returned George Zerwas, who the report says was a member of a pedophile ring, to ministry. Worrell even presided over Zerwas' funeral. He also approved monthly sustenance payments of up to $1,000 to Richard Zula, also a member of the pedophile ring after Zula's release from prison.
And when victims pressed charges, the priests were moved overseas to third world Catholic countries where they held massive power and influence, and the locals had little to no legal recourse for sex abuse cases.
The Catholic Church has allowed priests accused of sexually abusing children in the United States and Europe to escape their past by moving to parishes in poor, remote corners of the developing world. This despite ongoing pledges from a new pope to clean up the church's record on abuse scandals. All but one of the men we found continue to work as priests, enjoying the privilege, respect, and unfettered access to young people that comes with being a member of the clergy.
Victims were routinely paid off in exchange for their silence.
Imelda claims 2 church members then paid her $150 to keep silent.
The church paid Denef compensation in return for his silence.
The boys were given money, $9,000 to not press charges.
Since the 1980s, the Catholic Church in the US alone and its insurance agencies have paid over $3.8 billion in legal fees and settlements with sex abuse victims. When victims did take matters to the police or to the courts, the authorities, especially in predominantly Catholic countries, would often dismiss the victims' claims without doing a proper investigation, accusing them of lying.
Jose Andres Murillo, now 43, claimed Father Caradima sexually abused him in the 1990s while he trained to become a priest. He says many Chileans initially refused to believe the allegations.
How were you treated? What were you called?
We were gays or enemies of the church, or trying to destroy the moral and the ethics of our country. It was very, very, very hard.
Imelda reported the matter to police, but her God-fearing family forced her to drop the complaint.
They actually beat me to the point that I was afraid to go home. They were angry at me. They were telling me that what I did was wrong. They treated me like a stray dog because of what I did, because I filed a case.
In other instances, the church would pressure the authorities to look the other way, or would actively attempt to discredit the victims.
You had 7 barristers there questioning me and telling me I was telling lies when I told them that I got raped of a Saturday, got a merciful beating after it, and then he came along the following morning and put Holy Communion in my mouth. You don't know what happened there. My God. 7 barristers throwing questions at us, non-stop. I attempted to commit suicide. There's the woman who saved me from committing suicide on my way down from Dublin after spending 5 days at the commission. 5 days I spent at the commission. They brought a man over from Rome, 90-odd years of age, to tell me I was telling lies. That I wasn't beaten for an hour, non-stop, by 2 of them. By 2 of them, non-stop, from head to toe, without a shred of cloth on my body. My God, minister. That woman will tell you how many times I jump out of the bed at night with the sweat pumping out of me because I see these fellas at the end of the bed with their fingers doing that to me and pulling me into the room to rape me, to bugger me, and beat the shite out of me.
One woman, Julianne Bortz, in the Pennsylvania Report, told a priest of her abuse shortly after it happened, and he abruptly dismissed her, saying, "I don't want to hear it. You go to confession and you pray for him." Several years later, she tried to report it again, and the church hierarchy told her, "Don't say the name." They didn't even want to hear about it. After the 2002 Boston Globe report, she got the courage to go to the police and was told by the district attorney that the statute of limitations had already passed. In 2004, she tried to file a civil suit against the church and was told again that the statute of limitations had run its course. And what did the church do in response to these allegations? They hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on her and discredit her if needed. Her abuser retired in 2002 without ever facing justice. But how could this possibly be so widespread? Well, what do you expect when you take an army of sexually immature celibates and place them in positions of power over helpless minors? As the scale of the abuse grew, in 1962, the Pope himself sent a letter out to every bishop in the world, instructing them on how to deal with allegations of sexual abuse, telling them to treat each sex abuse case, quote, in the most secretive way, restrained by a perpetual silence, under the penalty of excommunication. Since the Boston Globe Spotlight team revealed to the world the scope of the abuse and cover-up in 2002, the Catholic Church has sought to implement reforms including a zero-tolerance policy.
I'm saying zero tolerance prospectively. Everybody's on the same page. If this ever happens again, that's it.
But is it working?
Every bishop is the ruler of his own diocese and reports only directly to the Pope. And so every bishop was following his own policy. Some were more proactive, some were completely negligent, and some were criminal in that they were covering up known abusers and failing to report them to law enforcement.
We have to come to a standard not of zero tolerance, but a standard of forgiveness.
Here's what one bishop told the Guardian newspaper. Politicians can change the law, but we can't change the nature of the confessional, which is a sacred encounter between a penitent and someone seeking forgiveness and a priest representing Christ. It doesn't affect us. Basically, they're saying they won't follow the law.
They don't follow the law. They rape children. It's against the law to rape children. They don't care about our laws. They care about canon laws.
Despite apology after hollow apology from the Pope himself, the one person who has absolute authority and can fix all of this in a heartbeat, these abuses continue to occur, and the Church continues to cover it up.
The Holy See will be following very closely to discover how this tragedy took place, these tragic events, and to ensure that measures are taken to ensure that it will never reoccur again.
The Vatican says that it will now, it has for some time said, it will cooperate with local authorities, meaning that they will turn over accused abusive priests and so on to local authorities for prosecution. Victims and their families want the Vatican to be held more accountable. The Vatican says that it will be in the future.
The Pope condemned the atrocities suffered by at least 1,000 minors at the hands of more than 300 clergy members over 70 years. But the Pope stopped short of offering concrete steps to remove abusive priests or sanction those who took part in cover-ups.
Does the Church's response give you any faith?
No, it's the same old response. The Pope didn't tell us who the 30 names are in the redacted report. You know, the Attorney General wants to tell us who the names are. He's dying to tell us who the names are and where they are, and whose neighborhoods that they're in, and whose children that they're around. But he's forbidden because the lobbyists and the people that pay for the Church's bills, the people that pay these lobbyists and these law firms, were successful at getting them to redact it, and they're successful at getting legislation squashed down in the Republican-held Senate.
Enough with the shallow apologies. Enough with the half-baked attempts at reform. I'll believe that the Church takes abuse seriously when I see change. If the Catholic Church genuinely cared about justice and transparency, they would defrock the abusers and publicly release their records on decades of abuse. They would take the zero-tolerance policy global and take it seriously, and they would make the reporting of sexual abuse by the clergy to local authorities 100% mandatory. Until that day comes, I will continue to call it like I see it. The Catholic Church is a pedophile syndicate, and anyone who donates to it is complicit in their crimes against the most vulnerable of our children. Don't support this monster, and don't drink the Catholic Kool-Aid.